The smell of recycled air always reminded Ambassador David Reed of failure. 300 years of human diplomacy, and still he sat in the back row of the Galactic Council chambers, like a child waiting for permission to speak. The massive dome, above Centris Prime, stretched endlessly, filled with floating platforms where the galaxy's ruling species conducted their business with the casual arrogance of those who had never known real struggle. David adjusted his simple black suit and watched, as the insectoid hive queen Thesara clicked her mandibles in what passed for laughter among her kind. The crystalline architect Lord Corvin chimed in harmonious tones that somehow managed to sound condescending, even through the universal translator. They were discussing humanity's latest petition, the one David had spent 6 months preparing, the one that represented the desperate needs of 12 billion humans scattered across 47 colonies. The request from the human delegation is, as always, charmingly naive, Thesara announced to the assembled council. Her compound eyes reflected the chamber's light in 1,000 tiny rainbows. They wish to establish mining operations in the Tau Ceti system, a system, I must remind this esteemed body, that lies outside their designated expansion zone. David felt his jaw tighten. The Tau Ceti system had been discovered by human exploration vessels 2 years ago, empty except for asteroid belts rich in rare metals that Earth's growing population desperately needed. But according to Galactic Council law, discovery meant nothing. Only full council members could authorize new territorial claims. Lord Corvin's crystal form pulsed with soft blue light as he spoke. Perhaps our young human friends fail to understand the delicate balance we maintain. The Tau Ceti system borders 3 established territories. Allowing primitive mining operations there could destabilize regional harmony. The word primitive hit David like a physical blow. Behind him, Captain Roy Hayes shifted in his dress uniform. The old soldier's weathered face remained impassive, but David could feel the anger radiating from him like heat from a furnace. Roy had fought in the border wars, had seen human ingenuity turn impossible odds into stunning victories. Being called primitive by species who hadn't known conflict in millennia was like being lectured on courage by someone who had never faced danger. With respect, David said, rising from his seat. The chamber fell silent, not out of courtesy, but out of surprise. Humans rarely interrupted council proceedings. My people discovered the Tau Ceti system. Our surveys mapped its resources. Our colonies desperately need those materials to support growing populations on worlds that barely sustain life. Thesara's mandibles clicked faster, a sign of annoyance. Ambassador Reed, your species has been granted considerable leeway over the centuries. 47 worlds is quite generous for a probationary member. Perhaps if humanity demonstrated greater wisdom in managing its existing territories, the Council might consider future expansions. The translation of her words was clear. Know your place and be grateful for what you have been given. David looked around the chamber at the faces of species who had ruled the galaxy for millennia. The slug-like merchants who controlled interstellar trade through bureaucratic strangleholds. The energy beings of the bright collective who spoke in riddles and considered physical matter beneath their notice. The warrior poets of the Iron Clans, who had not fought a real war in over 2,000 years but still wore ancient battle honors like jewelry. All of them looked at humanity the same way, not as equals who had earned their place through 3 centuries of faithful service, not as allies who had contributed their unique perspectives to galactic civilization, but as children who needed constant supervision and guidance. There is another matter, Lord Corvin announced, his crystal form shifting through spectrum of colors. Recent reports indicate human vessels have been encountered in sectors beyond their authorized travel zones. While we understand the curious nature of your species, these explorations must cease, effective immediately. All human ships traveling beyond designated space lanes must be accompanied by Council escort vessels. The chamber erupted in harmonious agreement from the assembled species. David felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Escort vessels. It was imprisonment disguised as protection, a leash wrapped in diplomatic language. Captain Hayes leaned forward and whispered, "Sir, with respect, this is not what we signed up for." David knew exactly what Roy meant. 300 years ago, when human ships first encountered Galactic Council forces, humanity had been given a choice: submit to Council authority and accept probationary status, or face the combined military might of 47 advanced civilizations. Earth's leaders had chosen survival, believing that time and good behavior would eventually earn humanity equal standing. They had been wrong. Ambassador Reed, Thessera continued, I trust humanity will comply with these new safety protocols. Your species' tendency toward reckless exploration has caused concern among several council members. These escort requirements are for your own protection. David looked at Captain Hayes and saw 3 centuries of suppressed human pride burning in the old soldier's eyes. Roy had spent his career watching human innovation solve problems that stumped alien experts. He had seen human determination overcome obstacles that other species considered impossible. And now he sat in dress uniform listening to insects and crystals lecture him about reckless behavior. The session ended with its usual ceremonial dismissal. Species representatives filed out in order of council precedence, with humans bringing up the rear as always. David and Roy walked in silence through the gleaming corridors of the station, past architectural marvels that showcased the artistic achievements of dozens of civilizations. Everything beautiful, everything perfect, everything designed to remind lesser species of their place in the grand order. That night, David sat alone in his quarters, staring out at the stars. Somewhere out there, on Earth and Mars and Europa and 44 other human worlds, people were looking at those same stars and dreaming of what lay beyond their carefully maintained boundaries. Children who would grow up knowing they were second-class citizens in their own galaxy. Families struggling to survive on marginal worlds, while rich systems remained off-limits to human development. He opened a secure communication channel to Earth. The message was simple, but its implications would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. Prime Minister Torres, 300 years is enough. David Reed. In 12 hours, that message would reach Earth. In 13 hours, Prime Minister Angela Torres would convene an emergency session of the Human Colonial Alliance, and in 2 weeks, the galaxy would discover what happened when humanity's infinite patience finally ran out. The age of asking permission was about to end. The age of taking what belonged to them was about to begin. The rain hammered against the windows of the Unity building as Prime Minister Angela Torres walked through halls that had witnessed 3 centuries of human diplomatic effort. Each portrait lining the corridor showed a leader who had tried to earn humanity's place at the galactic table through patience, compromise, and endless good faith. Tonight she would be the first to choose a different path. The emergency session had been called within hours of receiving David Reed's message from Centris Prime. Representatives from every human world had dropped everything to attend, some traveling for days through hyperspace to reach Earth. The chamber buzzed with nervous energy as delegates took their seats, each one carrying the weight of their world's hopes and frustrations. Ladies and gentlemen, Angela began, her voice carrying across the packed assembly hall. For 300 years we have played by their rules, we have accepted their limitations, we have swallowed our pride and called it diplomacy. Tonight, we decide if that era ends. General Patricia Knox rose from her seat in the military section. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her uniform displayed ribbons from conflicts most council species had never heard of. The border, wars, the Titan Rebellion, the Europa Ice campaigns, humans fighting humans, as the galaxy's species loved to remind them. But each conflict had taught lessons that their peaceful neighbors had never learned. Prime Minister, if I may, Patricia said, activating the holographic display at the center of the chamber. For the past 50 years, Human Defense Command has been conducting deep reconnaissance operations throughout Council space. What we discovered should concern every human in this room. The display flickered to life, showing detailed tactical analyses of Council military forces, fleet compositions, weapon capabilities, defensive installations, information gathered by human intelligence networks that the galaxy's ruling powers never suspected existed. The Council's peacekeeping forces number approximately 2 million vessels spread across their territory, Patricia continued. Impressive until you realize that most of these ships are ceremonial. The average Council patrol vessel has not engaged in actual combat for over 1,800 years. Their weapons are designed for intimidation, their shields for show, their tactics based on theories rather than experience. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Representative Michael Park from the Mars colonies leaned forward in his seat. "General, are you suggesting their military is ineffective?" "I'm suggesting their military is a museum exhibit," Patricia replied bluntly. "The Council maintains order through reputation and overwhelming numbers, not combat effectiveness. They have forgotten how to fight because they have never needed to learn." Dr. Robert Chen stood from the science delegation, a tablet clutched in his weathered hands. As head of applied sciences, he had overseen humanity's technological development for the past 2 decades. "General Knox is correct, but the situation is more complex than pure military analysis suggests. May I present Project Prometheus?" Angela nodded, though the project name sent a chill down her spine. In human mythology, Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. The parallels were unsettling and entirely intentional. The holographic display shifted to show technical specifications that made several delegates gasp. Ship designs that looked human, but incorporated technologies far beyond what the Council believed possible. Weapons systems that combined human innovation with reverse-engineered alien science. Defensive measures that could stop energy blasts the Council considered unstoppable. For 50 years, Robert explained, every piece of Council technology that found its way into human hands was studied, dissected, and improved. Trade goods, diplomatic gifts, salvaged equipment from derelict ships. We have been learning while they assumed we were too primitive to understand. Representative Susan Wright from the asteroid mining colonies raised her hand. "Dr. Chen, you're talking about technologies that could revolutionize human civilization. Why were we never told?" "Because knowledge like this changes people," Angela answered. "Once you know you can fight gods, it becomes very hard to kneel before them. We wanted to be sure we were ready for the consequences." The chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed the implications. Hidden throughout human space were shipyards building vessels that could match Council technology, research facilities developing weapons that could punch through alien shields, training centers where human officers learned to command fleets in real combat, not the ceremonial maneuvers that passed for military exercise in Council space. Admiral Thomas Blake, recently retired from the Europa Defense Force, spoke from his seat near the back of the chamber. "Prime Minister, what you're describing as preparation for war. Are we really considering military action against the entire Galactic Council?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an ancient battlefield. Angela looked around the chamber at faces representing billions of humans spread across dozens of worlds. Farmers on agricultural planets who watched their children leave for overcrowded cities because territorial restrictions prevented expansion. Miners on airless rocks who extracted resources to trade for technologies humanity could have developed independently. Scientists whose research was monitored and limited by Council oversight committees. "Admiral Blake," she said slowly, "I prefer to think of it as preparation for independence. The Council has made it clear that humanity will never be treated as equals. We can accept permanent second-class status, or we can remind the galaxy why humans are the only species that named concepts like freedom and independence worth dying for." General Knox activated another display, showing current Council force deployments. Their fleets are spread thin across 47 systems, maintaining what they call peacekeeping operations. Most are showing the flag rather than providing actual security. Meanwhile, human forces have been quietly repositioning themselves, using commercial shipping routes and civilian cover identities. The implications became clear to everyone in the room simultaneously. While the Council debated humanity's latest petition, human military assets had been moving into position throughout their space. Merchant vessels that could drop stealth fields and reveal weapons. Mining ships that carried enough firepower to level cities. Transport craft filled with soldiers trained in actual combat rather than parade formations. "The question before us," Angela continued, "is simple. Do we continue begging for scraps from their table, or do we build our own table and invite everyone to sit as equals?" The vote was not even close. 437 representatives voted to end humanity's probationary status through direct action. 12 voted to continue diplomatic efforts. 3 abstained. As delegates filed out of the chamber to begin implementing plans that had been decades in the making, Angela stood alone at the window watching rain streak down the glass. Somewhere in that storm she could almost see the future approaching. Council fleets scrambling to respond to threats they did not understand. Alien species learning that humanity's greatest strength was not technology or numbers, but the willingness to risk everything for principles they believed. In the age of human patience was ending. The age of human independence was about to begin, whether the galaxy was ready or not. In her pocket, her communication device chimed with a message from Ambassador Reed. Council has announced new restrictions on human travel. Escort requirements. Now in effect. How should I respond? Angela smiled as she typed her reply. With the truth, David. All of it. The merchant vessel Prosperity drifted through the Vega system like any of 1,000 similar ships that traveled Council trade routes every day. Her cargo manifest listed agricultural equipment bound for the farming colonies of Kepler Prime. Her crew roster showed 12 humans with clean records and proper transit permits. Her captain, a middle-aged woman named Lisa Park, had been making these runs for 15 years without incident. None of this was true. Captain Roy Hayes stood on the bridge that bore no resemblance to any merchant vessel in Council space. Banks of military sensors tracked 17 targets throughout the system. Weapons that could crack open battle stations lay hidden behind hull plates designed to look like simple cargo holds. The 12 crew members were veterans of conflicts that had taught them to fight smart rather than fair. Council patrol vessel approaching, reported Lieutenant Brady Walsh from the sensor station. The Sarin heavy cruiser. Configuration suggests about 2,000 crew. She's signaling for us to heave to and prepare for inspection. Roy smiled grimly as he watched the alien ship change course to intercept them. The cruiser was beautiful in the way Council ships always were, all flowing, curves and artistic design elements that served no practical purpose except to demonstrate their builders' technological superiority. It was also exactly the kind of target human forces had been waiting for. Open a channel to the cruiser, Roy ordered, and bring up the tactical display. Let them see what they're really dealing with. The main view screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the Thessaran vessel. Captain Veltok's compound eyes reflected the lights of his command station as he prepared to deliver what he assumed would be a routine lecture about proper travel procedures. His mandibles clicked in the rhythm that indicated mild annoyance at having to deal with another human violation of Council regulations. Human vessel, you are operating outside your designated shipping lanes, Veltok announced through the translator. Reduce speed and prepare to be boarded for inspection. Any resistance will result in impoundment of your vessel and criminal charges against your crew. Roy activated the ship's holographic projectors, allowing the Thessaran captain to see the true nature of his bridge. Military-grade equipment replaced the civilian systems Veltok expected. Weapon controls glowed with the soft red light that meant they were armed and ready. Most importantly, the human crew moved with the precise efficiency of soldiers rather than merchants. Captain Veltok, Roy said calmly, I'm going to offer you a choice that no Council species has given humanity in 300 years. Turn around, forget you saw us here, and go about your business. Or stay and discover why humans name their warships after concepts like vengeance, fury, and retribution. The Thessaran captain's compound eyes shifted through spectrum of colors. That indicated confusion, then disbelief, then growing alarm as his sensors began penetrating the human ship's disguise. What had appeared to be a simple cargo vessel was revealing itself as something that should not exist in Council space. This is impossible, Veltok clicked rapidly. Humans do not possess such technology. Your species lacks the industrial capacity for military vessels of this classification. You're half right, Roy admitted. We didn't possess this technology. We took it, improved it, and built something better. Your choice, Captain. Leave now, or explain to your Hive Queen why you lost an entire cruiser to a species you consider primitive. The Thessaran patrol ship powered weapons and raised shields, making their decision clear. Roy had expected nothing different. Council species had maintained their authority for millennia. through the assumption that their technological superiority was absolute. The concept that humans might have closed that gap was beyond their understanding. All stations, drop stealth. Fields and engage, Roy ordered. The space around the Vega system suddenly filled with human warships that had been hiding in sensor shadows and behind false cargo signatures. Not just one vessel, but dozens, all bearing names that spoke of humanity's long relationship with conflict. The retribution, the defiance, the unbroken, the iron will, each one a testament to lessons learned through centuries of warfare against impossible odds. The Thessaran cruiser managed to fire exactly 3 shots before human weapons tore through its shields like paper. Council defensive systems were designed to stop energy weapons, not the kinetic projectiles that humans preferred. Masses of metal accelerated to significant fractions of light speed did not care about energy absorption matrices or deflector. Fields. Captain Veltok's final transmission was a mixture of disbelief and terror. How is this possible? You are the peaceful species. You are the ones who ask permission. Roy watched the enemy ship break apart under the concentrated fire of his squadron and felt something that had been building in humanity for 3 centuries finally break free. Not anger exactly, and not hate, but a profound sense of relief that the pretense was finally over. Signal all units, he ordered. Operation Awakening is now active. Execute simultaneous strikes on designated Council assets throughout our operational area. Time to remind the galaxy what humans do when we stop, asking nicely. Across 27 star systems, similar scenes played out with mechanical precision. Human ships dropped their disguises and revealed themselves for what they truly were. The military force of a species that had been preparing for this moment since the day they first knelt before the Council's authority. On Centris Prime, Ambassador. David Reed walked through the same corridors where he had spent years begging for scraps of consideration. But tonight he carried himself differently. The weight of diplomatic failure had been replaced by something far more dangerous. The confidence of a species that had decided to stop apologizing for existing. The Council chambers were in chaos, as reports flooded in from across their territory. Human vessels were engaging Council patrols and winning. Trade routes were being disrupted by forces that should not have existed. Most disturbing of all, the humans were not simply attacking randomly but executing coordinated strikes that demonstrated detailed knowledge of Council military deployments. Hive-Queen. Thessara's mandibles clicked in patterns that indicated extreme agitation. How is this possible? Our intelligence networks reported no human military buildup. Their industrial capacity is insufficient for such an operation. Lord Corvin's crystal form pulsed with rapid color changes as he processed reports from his own people. The humans have been deceiving us. Their merchant vessels, their mining operations, their research stations, all of them were covers for military preparation. David entered the chamber without waiting for permission to speak. Behind him walked Captain Hayes, no longer in dress, uniform but wearing the black and silver of Human Defense Command. The symbolism was not lost on the assembled council members. Honored representatives, David began, his voice carrying none of the diplomatic deference that had marked his previous appearances. For 300 years, humanity has tried to earn your respect through patience, compromise, and faithful service. We have accepted restrictions on our expansion, limitations on our technology, and treatment as second-class citizens in our own galaxy. The chamber fell silent as David looked around at faces that had dismissed human concerns for centuries. Some showed fear, others anger, but all of them showed a growing understanding that the balance of power in the galaxy was shifting. Today, that changes, David continued. We are no longer asking for permission to exist as equals. We are taking our place whether you approve or not. Thessara rose from her platform, her compound eyes blazing with reflected light. This is an act of war against the lawful authority of the Galactic Council. Your species will face the combined might of 47 civilizations. David smiled, and for the first time since arriving at Centris Prime, he felt genuinely happy. Your Majesty, we're counting on it. You see, we've spent 3 centuries studying how you maintain control, fear, intimidation, overwhelming numbers, but you've forgotten the most important lesson of warfare. It doesn't matter how many ships you have if you don't know how to use them. The chamber erupted in angry voices as council members demanded military action against the human rebellion. David listened to their outrage with the satisfaction of someone who had finally stopped pretending to care about other people's opinions. The storm had broken at last, and humanity intended to ride it all the way to freedom. The command center beneath Luna's surface hummed with activity that would have seemed impossible to outside observers just months ago. General Patricia Knox stood before a holographic display showing the entire galaxy, watching as red indicators marked successful human operations across dozens of star systems. Each light represented centuries of suppressed human potential, finally unleashed upon an unsuspecting universe. Update from the Sirius sector, reported Colonel James Mitchell from the communications station. The merchant's primary trade hub has been secured. Minimal casualties on both sides, though their bureaucratic systems are proving more complex than expected. Patricia nodded grimly. The slug-like merchants had built their power through control of interstellar commerce, creating regulatory mazes that ensured all trade flowed through their designated channels. Human economists had spent decades studying their methods, preparing for the day when those channels would need to be redirected. "What about Kepler Station?" she asked. "Still in progress, General." Lieutenant Commander Burke's team encountered heavier resistance than anticipated, but they're adapting. On the fortress world of Kepler Station, Tom Burke crouched behind twisted metal that had once been an elegant council defensive position. The station's corridors were filled with radiation that would have forced any other species to retreat and wait for specialized equipment. Humans simply put on better suits and kept moving forward. "The shield generators are 3 levels down," Burke told his squad through the comm system. "Council engineering put them in the most protected part of the station, surrounded by enough radiation to kill anything organic in minutes." Sergeant Maria Santos checked her equipment readings and shrugged. "Good thing we're not anything organic anymore, sir. These suits should keep us alive long enough to plant the charges." The assault team moved through corridors designed by architects who had never considered the possibility of invasion. Council defensive philosophy focused on preventing ships from reaching their stations rather than fighting boarding actions. The concept that an enemy might be willing to accept massive casualties to achieve their objectives was beyond their understanding. Burke planted the final charge on the shield generator and activated the timer. "All teams, fall back to extraction. Points, 60 seconds to detonation." The explosion that followed sent shockwaves through the station's superstructure, but more importantly, it sent a message throughout council space. Humans were willing to accept losses that other species considered unacceptable. They would walk through radiation fields, fight in environments that should have been impossible to survive, and sacrifice themselves for objectives that seemed insignificant to outside observers. Back on Luna, Patricia watched the tactical display update as Kepler Station's defenses went offline. The station itself was intact, its population unharmed, but its ability to control the surrounding system had been eliminated. It was a pattern repeating itself across human operational areas. Maximum strategic impact with minimum unnecessary destruction. Dr. Chen's teams report another breakthrough, Colonel Mitchell announced. They've successfully reverse-engineered the Bright Collective's energy matrix technology. Patricia allowed herself a rare smile. Robert Chen's scientists were working around the clock, taking apart every piece of council technology they captured and rebuilding it according to human design principles. Where the original creators had prioritized elegance and efficiency, human engineers focused on raw power and reliability. "Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from the diplomatic team on Centris Prime," the communications officer reported. "Ambassador Reed requests permission to begin Phase 3 of the operation." Phase 3. Patricia had hoped they would not need to implement the final stage of their plan, but council resistance had been more determined than expected. Some species were beginning to understand that this was not a simple rebellion that could be crushed through superior numbers. "Granted," she said. "Signal all commanders to prepare for expanded operations." The transmission went out to human forces throughout the galaxy, activating sleeper agents and hidden assets that had been in place for decades. On council worlds, Humans who had lived quiet lives as merchants, researchers, and laborers suddenly revealed their true nature. Not as conquerors or destroyers, but as liberators speaking to species that had forgotten what freedom meant. On the mining world of Rigel 7, a human trade representative named Paul Grant stood before a gathering of the native diggers, insectoid, beings who had spent centuries extracting rare metals from their planet's crust under council oversight. The minerals went off-world to fund council operations, while the diggers received just enough compensation to survive. Your people discovered the mining techniques that make this operation possible, Paul told them through a translator. Your ancestors mapped these tunnels, developed the extraction methods, built the infrastructure. Why should others profit from your work? The lead digger, an ancient creature whose carapace bore scars from decades of dangerous mining operations, clicked, his mandibles in confusion. The council provides protection, maintains order, prevents chaos. What if I told you that protection was just another form of control? Paul asked. What if there was a way for your people to benefit directly from your own resources? Similar conversations were taking place on dozens of worlds throughout council space. Species that had been kept in technological stagnation were being offered advanced tools and techniques. Races that had been denied expansion rights were being shown habitable worlds that council regulations had placed off limits. Most importantly, civilizations that had been told they were not ready for independence were being given the chance to prove otherwise. The response was not universal, but it was significant enough to shake the foundations of council authority. Within days of the human uprising, 17 member species had declared neutrality in the conflict. 3 had openly joined the human cause. Most significantly, the warrior poets of the Iron Clans had begun asking uncomfortable questions about why their ancient battle honors were decorative rather than functional. On Centris Prime, Hive Queen Thessera convened an emergency military council as reports flooded in from across their territory. The human rebellion was not behaving like any military uprising in recorded galactic history. Instead of trying to conquer territory, they were dismantling the economic and political systems that maintained council control. They are not trying to replace us, she realized with growing alarm. They are trying to make us irrelevant. Lord Corvin's crystal form flickered through rapid color changes as he processed intelligence reports from his people. The situation is worse than we initially calculated. Human technology is not simply equivalent to ours, it is specifically designed to counter our advantages. Their weapons penetrate our shields. Their ships outmaneuver our formations. Their tactics exploit weaknesses we did not know existed. The truth was becoming clear to council leadership, though none of them wanted to acknowledge it openly. Humanity had spent 3 centuries studying their rulers with the focused intensity of prey animals, learning to understand predators. Every council strength had been cataloged and countered. Every weakness had been identified and exploited. Most disturbing of all was the realization that humans were not trying to destroy council civilization, but to transform it. They were offering member species something the council had never provided: the opportunity to rise based on merit rather than birthright, to expand based on capability rather than political favor, to advance based on innovation rather than bureaucratic approval. We are facing the end of our civilization, Thessera announced to the assembled military commanders. Not through conquest, but through obsolescence. The humans are proving that our way of governing is not the only way, perhaps not even the best way. The irony was profound and painful. The species they had considered too primitive for full membership was demonstrating sophistication that surpassed their own. The humans they had dismissed as violent and chaotic were building alliances based on mutual benefit rather than imposed authority. As the council debated their response to the human uprising, reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy. Human forces were not simply winning battles, they were winning converts. Species that had accepted council rule for millennia were beginning to imagine alternatives. The old order was crumbling, not because it was being destroyed from outside, but because it was being replaced by something better from within, and at the center of that transformation were humans, the species that had never stopped believing that things could be different. if someone was willing to make them different. The galaxy was learning what Earth had discovered long ago, that the most dangerous revolutionaries were not those who sought to tear down the existing system, but those who offered to build something better in its place. The Great Dome of Centris Prime had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations across millennia, but never had it hosted a gathering quite like this one. Where once the Galactic Council had sat in judgment over lesser species, now representatives from across the galaxy gathered as equals to build something entirely new. The floating platforms that had once displayed rigid hierarchy now formed circles where any voice could be heard. Ambassador David Reed stood at what had been the Council's central podium, looking out at faces that represented the galaxy's transformed future. Humans sat beside former Council members, liberated species mixed with their former overseers, and everywhere he looked, he saw the impossible made real, a truly representative government. The old council claimed to maintain order through strength and wisdom. David began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's perfect acoustics. What they actually maintained was stagnation through fear and control. Today, we replace that system with something our species has always believed in: the right of every civilization to rise as high as their efforts can take them. In the seats that had once belonged exclusively to council members, the surviving leadership of the old order sat in positions they were still learning to accept. Hive Queen Thessara's compound eyes reflected the chamber lights as she processed the reality of her species' new status. No longer rulers but partners in a system that valued contribution over birthright. Lord Corvin's crystal form had been dimmed since the surrender, his usual confident glow replaced by the uncertain flicker of someone adapting to unexpected circumstances. The architect species had built their identity around superiority and control. Learning to function as equals would require fundamental changes in their civilization. The Galactic Federation will operate on principles the old council never understood, David continued. Scientific advancement through open collaboration rather than hoarded knowledge. Economic prosperity through fair trade rather than exploitative regulation. Military security through mutual defense rather than imposed control. Admiral Hayes entered the chamber wearing the uniform of the new Federation fleet, a design that incorporated elements from dozens of different species, while maintaining the practical functionality that marked human military thinking. Behind him walked officers representing the integrated command structure that would govern the galaxy's combined military forces. The transformation had not been without its challenges. Several council species had initially refused to accept the new order, launching desperate counterattacks against human positions, but their resistance had crumbled when they discovered that humanity's rebellion had become something much larger than they had anticipated. Species after species had joined the Federation, not because they feared human military power, but because they recognized an opportunity for genuine self-determination. The mining clans of Rigel 7 now controlled their own resource extraction and kept the profits for planetary development. The research collectives of the Outer Rim were sharing their discoveries freely instead of submitting them to council oversight. Most significantly, younger species were being offered immediate full membership based on their capabilities rather than arbitrary waiting periods. Dr. Chen will now present the Technological Integration Report, David announced. Robert Chen took the podium with the enthusiasm of someone who had spent his career watching artificial limitations placed on scientific progress. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings of all classifications, he began, I am pleased to report that the first year of open technological sharing has produced advances that exceed our most optimistic projections. The holographic display activated, showing innovations that would have been impossible under the old system: human kinetic weapons enhanced with Thessaran bioengineering, architect crystalline computing systems powered by human fusion technology, bright collective energy matrices stabilized using techniques developed by the Iron Clans. When species are allowed to contribute their unique strengths instead of being restricted by bureaucratic limitations, progress accelerates exponentially, Robert explained. We have achieved in 12 months what the council system might have required decades to approve. The presentation continued with examples that demonstrated the Federation's guiding philosophy. The agricultural worlds were now feeding themselves, using farming techniques that combined the best innovations from multiple species. The frontier colonies were expanding safely using exploration methods that drew on humanity's experience with hostile environments and other species' advanced sensor technologies. But the real victory was not technological or military. It was philosophical. Captain Lisa Park, who had commanded the merchant vessel that began the revolution, now served as administrator for the former Thessaran trade hub in the Vega system. Her office overlooked docking bays where ships from dozens of species arrived daily, carrying goods and ideas that would have been restricted under the old system. Where council regulations had once required weeks of paperwork and approval processes, Federation protocols allowed legitimate trade to flow freely while maintaining security through cooperation rather than suspicion. The difference is remarkable, she reported during her weekly briefing to Federation headquarters. Species that barely interacted under council rule are now collaborating on projects that benefit everyone involved. The digger mining techniques are being adapted for use on ice worlds. The Ironclad's metallurgical expertise is being combined with bright collective energy systems to create new construction materials. Innovation is happening at every level. The transformation went beyond mere policy changes. On worlds throughout Federation space, children were growing up with opportunities their parents had never imagined. Young Thessarans worked alongside human engineers, learning that cooperation could achieve more than competition. Architect juveniles studied with digger craftsmen, discovering that beauty and function were not mutually exclusive concepts. Most importantly, the galaxy was remembering how to dream. Back in the Centris Prime Chamber, David concluded his presentation with words that would have been unthinkable under the old system. The Federation's greatest strength is not our military power or our technological capabilities. It is our willingness to treat every species as having something valuable to contribute. When beings are free to pursue their potential without artificial limitations, the entire galaxy benefits. The applause that followed came from representatives of 43 species, each one now holding equal status in the galactic community. Some, like the younger civilizations that had been denied advancement, under council rule, embraced their new opportunities with enthusiasm. Others, particularly former council members, were still adjusting to the concept of earning their influence rather than inheriting it. Hive-Queen Thessara requested permission to speak, a protocol that would have been unnecessary during her species' time and power. Ambassador Reed, she said, her translated voice carrying notes of something that might have been humility. The Thessaran Collective wishes to acknowledge that our previous policies were flawed. We maintained control through systems that prevented growth rather than encouraging it. The Federation model demonstrates possibilities we had not considered. It was as close to an apology as any former council member had offered, and David accepted it with the grace that had marked human diplomacy even during their years of subjugation. Your Majesty, the Federation values the Thessaran contribution to galactic civilization. Your species' biological expertise and organizational skills are essential to our shared future. We judge our members by what they contribute going forward, not what they did in the past. The session continued with reports from across Federation space. Former Council military assets were being integrated into the new fleet structure, with human tactical doctrine training alien crews in combat techniques that emphasized adaptability over rigid hierarchy. Trade routes that had been artificially restricted were opening new markets and opportunities. Most significantly, exploration missions were being launched to sectors that Council regulations had placed off-limits for centuries. Admiral Hayes presented the military integration report with the satisfaction of someone who had spent his career watching human tactical innovations dismissed by alien authorities. Federation fleet doctrine emphasizes the strengths of each member species while maintaining operational flexibility. Thessaran ships provide excellent reconnaissance capabilities. Architect vessels serve as mobile command platforms. Ironclad cruisers excel at planetary assault operations. Human ships coordinate overall fleet movements and provide heavy weapon support. The result was a military force that combined the best aspects of multiple civilizations while eliminating the weaknesses that had made Council fleets vulnerable to human tactics. More importantly, it was a military that served the interests of all Federation members rather than enforcing the will of a ruling elite. As the session drew to a close, David looked around the chamber one final time. A year ago, he had sat in the back row of this same room, listening to alien powers dismiss human concerns with casual arrogance. Today, he stood at its center as an equal among equals, representing a species that had proven its worth not through conquest, but through liberation. The Federation faces challenges ahead, he concluded. Some Council loyalist species continue to resist integration. Resource allocation disputes will require careful negotiation. Most importantly, we must ensure that success does not lead us to repeat the mistakes of our predecessors. The warning was not idle. Human history provided numerous examples of liberation movements that became oppressive regimes. The Federation's founders were determined to avoid that fate by building systems that prevented any single species or group from accumulating too much power. But if we remain true to our founding principles, David continued, if we continue to judge civilizations by their contributions rather than their origins, if we maintain the courage to change when change is needed, then the galaxy we are building will surpass anything that came before. The chamber erupted in applause that echoed off the ancient dome, a sound of hope and determination that marked the end of one age and the beginning of another. Outside the station's windows, ships from dozens of worlds moved through space with the freedom to explore, to trade, to dream without asking permission from distant authorities. The day humanity's patience had finally run out had become the day the galaxy learned what freedom really meant. And in the years to come, when historians of multiple species studied this transformation, they would note that the most remarkable aspect was not how quickly the old order fell, but how eagerly the galaxy embraced what rose to replace it. The HFY Federation was more than a government. It was proof that beings could choose cooperation over domination, growth over stagnation, hope over fear. And at its heart was a simple truth that humanity had carried through centuries of struggle, that any civilization, no matter how small or young, deserved the chance to reach for the stars.